Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We're going to take a look at a video from the Untold Past, and it is Whitby Abbey, the home of Dracula. You guys wanted me to take a look at Whitby after one of the recent videos that I had posted, and this is one of the ones that came up. I'm going to do another one as well, but this one looked kind of interesting. I do know Dracula, or well, who they based it off of. I think it was like Vlad was a um, conqueror, I don't know what they would call that. I think he was like a prince or something, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, he was conquering places left and right, putting people's heads on stakes. And it was Transylvania. I've seen other documentaries just of like his castle there that still exists, and they do tours. I believe. I know it still exists. I think they do tours. If not, missed opportunity. But we're gonna take a look at this. I don't know what he has to do with Whitby. Um, maybe. Well, I don't know. Maybe it was. I don't know. We're gonna find out though. But I will link this video in the description, along with a link over to Patreon, a link of how you can support the channel here on YouTube. I did start a GoFundMe. If you guys want to donate towards me making a trip over there and getting to tour a couple places in the UK, Scotland, uh, obviously, hopefully London. I'd like to go to York, Cardiff, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. That's going to be a future thing. But if you guys want to donate towards that, that would be awesome. If not, just happy to have you here watching. And yeah, let's just go ahead and jump right into it.
The ruins of Whitby Abbey are one of the most celebrated and famous sites in North Yorkshire. Whitby Abbey's lore and story is overlooked by the myth of Dracula, based upon the novel written by Bram Stoker. Serving as the inspiration for the Gothic novel, Whitby Abbey today is an extremely imposing and notorious building. However, what is the history behind this extremely famous monastic structure? Join us today as we look at the history and show you around the awe-inspiring Whitby Abbey. Remember, if you do enjoy our videos,
that
please
was
support the channel
gorgeous
by
back in its
subscribing.
day.
A religious site has stood tall upon a headland in the coastal town of Whitby for almost 1500 years. The first monastery was founded in 657 by the Anglo-Saxon era King of Northumbria, Oswy. He appointed Lady Hilda, the abbess of Hartlepool Abbey, and the grandniece of Edwin, the first Christian king of Northumbria, to be its founding abbess. In 664, the Synod of Whitby took place at the monastery to debate whether the Northumbrian Church would follow the Celtic Christian traditions or adopt Roman practices. Here they would also debate the date of Easter, and they decided to adopt the Roman way. It was one of a number of monasteries established along the mouth of rivers. More recent excavations on the land around Whitby Abbey have unearthed hundreds of burials dating from the 7th and 8th century. From this, it is clear that a lost Anglian settlement existed upon the headland where Whitby Abbey stands. What isn't as clear is what led to their demise. However, one can assume that the settlement was destroyed at the hands of Viking raiders who began to attack the east coast in the mid-9th century. The monastery that existed here too was laid to waste also by the Danes. By the 11th century, the settlement on the headland had died and was succeeded by a new town which spawned around the harbour. This town was given the Danish name of Whitby. In around 1078, a monk named Raeford founded a new monastic community at Whitby. In the early stages of its history, this community was split, and the two parts each developed into a fully fledged Benedictine monastery. One of these parts was based at Whitby Abbey, the other at St Mary's Abbey in York. The Benedictine monastery initially had timber buildings, or reused the old Anglian ruins that sat upon the headland. In around 1100, a stone church was built here in a Romanesque style. The Romanesque church would stand here until the 13th century. At this time, the abbots would decide to launch an extremely ambitious project. In the 13th century, the monastery church was rebuilt in a Gothic style. This was a huge project and undertaking, which included a huge landscaping of the whole site. The first building campaign is dated to around 1225 to 1250. The eastern arm of the abbey, the crossing complete with transepts, a central tower and part of the nave were built before building work was stopped. This is most probably due to the fact that funds were running out to complete the project. In 1338, a monk from Whitby started to raise funds for the building of the abbey. Work was resumed on the nave in the 14th century, but was not finished until the 15th century. It is believed too that many more buildings were built to the south of the abbey. In 1539, Whitby Abbey was suppressed during the dissolutions of the monasteries. During this period, Henry VIII would brutally disband the monasteries, priories, convents and friaries in England, Wales and Ireland. He would then steal their income, dispose of their assets and cause much damage. Following this, Sir Richard Cholmondeley bought the abbey's buildings and its estate. The family then adapted part of the abbot's lodgings into a house. The Cholmondeleys would play a notable part later in English Civil War, defending the nearby Scarborough Castle during a siege before it was captured. In the 18th century, the shell of the abbey was substantially complete, however it was weakened due to the erosion from the wind and rain. In 1736, the south transept collapsed, as did the nave in 1763. The central tower then followed in 1830, and the south side of the presbytery in 1839. During the early 19th century, the town of Whitby became a popular seaside resort. The abbey's ruins became a tourist destination, and rising interest from the site led to a number of artists visiting the area. It is here where a visit to Whitby would lead to its most infamous legacy, of which is still remembered today. Bram Stoker would arrive in the town of Whitby and was working on a novel at the time. Over the course of a week, he would explore the town and also the abbey. The windswept headland, with its dramatic abbey ruins sat on top of it, with a church nearby, which was surrounded by bats, would be the inspiration behind the character and story of Dracula. It is here where we begin our tour of the brilliant and spectacular Whitby Abbey. The nave of Whitby Abbey is much more ruined than the presbytery, as much of it collapsed in the 1760s. The remains of the nave that stand show its huge scale and colossal size. The Gothic nave was constructed on the site of the 12th century Romanesque nave, which interestingly has never been excavated. There is Romanesque masonry in the doorway on the west range. If Whitby followed the rule for how Benedictine abbeys were laid out, there would have been a solid screen, known as a pulpitum, around halfway down the nave, which would block off the view. The area beyond this was reserved for the monks. Often the area just after this screen would have been reserved for sick or older monks to hear services without having to fully participate. The huge nave would have been a visible demonstration to people of the piety and wealth of the abbey and its patrons. The transepts and crossing of Whitby were built before the nave. Inside the nave are a number of huge and ornate windows. While standing at one entrance and looking down the nave towards the sanctuary, you really do get hit by a shock of how huge the abbey would have been. If you glance up too, you can appreciate how tall the abbey would have been as well. The nave was also even hit by shells from a German battleship during the First World War.
Wow.
The shells would hit the west front of the abbey and cause a significant amount of damage. 3 of the nave's arches have been rebuilt against the modern exterior wall of the abbey's site. The transepts are the short arms in the cross-shaped church. At Whitby, the crossing where the transepts meet the nave and presbytery would have been capped with a colossal square tower. The transepts allowed for extra side chapels with altars, of which could have been dedicated to saints or figures of religious importance. An eroded inscription showed that one of these altars was dedicated to the Blessed Mary. Masses could be said at these chapels, in which patrons would pay handsomely for. The north transept at Whitby Abbey stands at its full height and is well preserved. However, the south transept fell in the mid-1730s. It is believed that the south transept was built similarly to the north. Standing in the transepts, you can see a number of different passageways and stairways that today lead to nowhere. The north transept today houses a spectacular circular window and contains many thin lancet windows. The Gothic architecture on offer here is extremely ornate. Inside the north transept, there is also a small aumbrey cupboard in the wall for storing sacred vessels. The stairway in the corner would give access to the triforium at the top of the transept. This is a gallery at an upper level of the church that opens up onto the nave from the side aisles. The presbytery is possibly the most impressive part of Whitby Abbey. There is no documentary evidence for when the exact building of this part of the abbey began. However, its early Gothic style suggests it was possibly started around the 1220s. In medieval England, most of the
Wow.
grandest monastery churches were
What an
Benedictine
endeavor.
houses, like the one at Whitby. The presbytery is 7 bays long and stands at its full height. The shell of this part of the abbey is mostly complete, except for the south aisle wall. The arm of this building served as the liturgical heart of the church. This is where monks sat for their services and where the high altar was and where mass was celebrated. The interior spaces of the monastery were divided into sections by screens. The presbytery would have been lime-washed and it would have had windows filled with stained glass. Monks would have been present in this area for their 8 services a day, and there would have been a number of timber screens around this area of the church between the arches. In English churches around the 13th century, it was common for the high altar to be placed in front of another screen. In several Benedictine monasteries, this area of the church was reserved for the shrine of a saint. Whitby's church was dedicated to St Peter and St Hild, and several Anglican saints, such as Edwin and Hild, were once buried at the abbey. There is no evidence, however, that the Benedictine monks ever possessed the bones of a saint at Whitby. When we visited, the sanctuary area of the abbey was roped off, in which still signifies the holiness of this area of the abbey. If you stand at the top of the presbytery and look directly at the back of the nave, you can really take in the grand size of Whitby Abbey. Next to the presbytery, on the south side, would have stood the sacristy. Today only remains stand of the sacristy. This is a room where vestments and other church furnishings, sacred vessels and parish records would have been kept. Next to here is also a small and mysterious tomb, with the lid removed, adding to its eerie atmosphere. Also next to the south transept would have been the site of the abbey's chapter house. Today very little stands of the chapter house, but in this area, senior members of the church and abbey would have held meetings. When looking at the exterior of the abbey, you can really consider why Bram Stoker took inspiration from the monastic building to create Dracula, one of the world's most well-known and popular horror stories. The shell which is left connotes a sense of mystery and mystique and is rather spooky. To help perpetuate this feeling, a number of tombstones and graves that are rather unnerving. A number of notable burials have allegedly took place over the centuries at Whitby Abbey, including Hilda of Whitby, Bosa of York, Oswy of Northumbria, and even Richard de Percy, who signed the Magna Carta. Overall, Whitby Abbey is an incredible and spectacular building that anyone visiting Yorkshire must go and see. It's an awe-inspiring structure that sits ominously above the town of Whitby. Its connotations today are mostly linked into the lore of vampires and Dracula, however its history and architecture are incredibly important and dominating. The shell of Whitby Abbey, the home of Dracula, and the home of 1500 years of religion and grandeur. Thank you for watching The Untold Past.
Well, that was really good. That was really interesting. Only a tiny bit about Dracula, but as you guys know, I love architecture and history, and that really showed a lot of it. Even looking at it from kind of farther away here, when you get up close to it, seeing just how big it is, like how big it really would have been, when it was in its prime, is almost unfathomable. It's like one of the big cathedrals. And it is interesting to kind of speculate and think about what they had there that was on the altar and displayed, and potentially what saint they had there. Um, Really good story. I can't wait to watch another video on Whitby and learn a little bit more about the town. He touched on it just a tiny bit that obviously it's very old and a lot of history, and that it's a seaside town, which I'm excited. I haven't seen too much of that, um, but I kind of have been looking forward to getting there. So can't wait to watch the next video on it. I enjoyed this one. It was from, again, The Untold Past. I will link this video in the description if you guys want to go check them out. We might take a look at some more of their videos because that one was fantastic. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and have an awesome day.